Thank you so much for joining us on Zoom tonight. It's a shame we couldn't be together in person, but that's just the reality of book launches at the moment. So thank you for joining us on Zoom for a discussion of J.P. Pomare's latest book, The Last Guest. It's a gripping thriller that I literally devoured in a weekend. Before we jump into things, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which I'm currently on in Mirandi, Brisbane, which is the Yagara and Turrbal people, as well as the traditional owners of the lands in which you're all joining us from on Zoom all over the country. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Onto some general housekeeping. For our audience, you will be muted for the session, but if you have any questions for me, please just type them into the chat box and I'll get onto those. You're welcome to leave your video on if you like. Just make sure that you're set to speaker view. That way you'll be able to see JP and Mirandi in full screen. And once I wrap up here, I will send through a link of where you can purchase your copy of the book into the chat box. And then this will also show you how to use the chat function, which will be very important for the Q&A that we'll host towards the end at around 7:20. We'll just see how we're going for time. So please feel free to type your questions throughout the event as they pop into your head, and then I'll pass them along to JP towards the end. So that's all from me. I'd love to introduce you to our conversation partner for tonight, Mirandi Riwoe. Mirandi is an award-winning writer from here in Brisbane. She's the author of Stone, Sky, Gold Mountain, and The Fish Girl. Over to you, Mirandi.
Thank you. Okay, so hi everyone. As she said, my name is Mirandi Riwoe, and it's my pleasure to be chatting with JP Pomare tonight about his thrilling new novel, The Last Guests. I believe I've got a copy that has a different cover. JP Pomare is the award-winning writer of Call Me Evie, In the Clearing, and Tell Me Lies. Call Me Evie won the Nio Marsh Award, and he's also been shortlisted for the Ned Kelly Awards. His work has been featured in journals including Meanjin, Kill Your Darlings, and Mascara. Hello, Josh.
Hello, Randy.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Unlike you up there, I'm locked in my house, but no, coping well. Yeah. No.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Now, Josh, this book was really hard to put down. Like Lana was saying, it was an absolutely exciting, suspenseful, satisfying ride. And I was filled with dread for poor Lina the whole way. And I actually smiled when I got to the end because I was like, oh, you got me. And congratulations on such a great book, JP.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on what this thrilling book's about, and then I'm going to ask you millions of questions. In the prologue of The Last Guest, we have this unidentified fellow setting up hidden cameras in a holiday rental house. We know he's doing something creepy. He knows exactly what he's doing, and we learn that he's in some sort of home accommodation for, like a holiday rental site called We Stay, which is a bit like Airbnb. Then the book turns to Lina and Cain. Cain was a soldier in Afghanistan and is struggling to maintain an income, and he gambles. And Lina is an ambulance officer who is trying to keep them afloat. So at the beginning of the book, Lina does something quite desperate, something she needs to keep secret that compromises her and Cain and ultimately sets the scary ball rolling. Meanwhile, they both decide to turn their holiday house that was left to Lina by her grandparents into a We Stay accommodation for the extra money. So, Josh, I'm not sure if you want to tell us a bit more about Lina. I'm just very conscious, like I don't want to give anything away. So can you just tell us what you'd like us to know about Lina, who is the protagonist of this story?
Yeah, sure. So Lina, I guess, right at the heart of the story is trauma in different shapes trauma takes, and more or less how it influences our landscape, our internal landscape, but also how we kind of, I guess, we desensitize ourselves to trauma, violence, and extreme, graphic, whatever you want to call it, but highly disturbing images or events. And I kind of touched upon this a little bit in Tell Me Lies as well. There's a character in there who's a content moderator for a social media platform, and all they do all day, every day is just view gruesome or really confronting images, child pornography and whatever, you know. So I think the thing about Lina, the thing you need to understand early is she's a paramedic, and she encounters, you know, lots of pretty gory scenes, as most emergency services people do in their time. She's also someone who had a pretty troubled home life growing up. So she's sort of, I guess she's trying to find a healthy or balanced version of the family that she didn't really have. And she's very much alone, except for her husband is sort of her rock. And they've been together since she was in her early 20s. He represented a pretty sharp deviation from men she'd seen before. He seemed pretty steady. He was in the military, whereas everyone she knew was students, and seemed to have a good head screwed on his shoulders. So yeah, I guess if I get too much further, we start looking at motivation, and I think we wade into spoiler territory. But suffice to say, for me, she's a you know, I think you can't call your own characters complex, but for me, she was, you know, psychologically very interesting, I think.
She's very interesting. I'm just going to read a part here, a tiny section from the novel. Page 92.
You said you wouldn't do this, Mirandi.
Pardon?
You said you wouldn't do this. No.
No, I'm going to read it.
Okay, go ahead.
I won't make you read it.
I know, I'll just my ears.
Do you not want me to read it? Okay, I won't read
go
it.
ahead. No, go ahead, please. Sorry.
When the weekend comes around, he does it again. Only this time I catch him in the act at his desk in the study. So it's Lina and her husband, Cain. I head in to ask if he needs anything from the grocer, and he's on their social media feeds. I lean against his desk. At it again, I say. Just checking up on them, he says. They're there now at our place. On Cherry's Instagram, there are photos from in our house, grinning, sitting around our table using our Yahtzee set and drinking the wine we left out for them from our glasses. I think you're a voyeur, I tease. Maybe I am, he says. I'm not going to pretend I don't find it interesting. Am I pretending that I don't find it interesting? You seem to be. He opens up the electricity app, bar graph spread on the page showing time of usage for the day. The information is out there. They are putting it out there. So there seems to be a theme throughout this novel that we are revealing too much of ourselves. Is that what underscores your book in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, that's probably, I don't know what part you're going to read, but I kind of forgot about that whole thread of it. And because we Airbnb'd our place out, and we more or less, probably not that exact scene, but we more or less did the same thing where we would check to see if they would, you know, we'd check the cameras to see what they're doing. No, we'd check their...
Check up on them, see who they were.
Yeah, you check up and see who they were, and yeah, it's quite fascinating. You know, you're letting these people into your home, so you want to make sure that they're you know, not going to do anything untoward, I suppose. But yeah, the more I looked into it, and the more, I mean, this instinctively, I've always been pretty anti-technology. I've never been like a neo-Luddite or whatever they call it. You know, I've never been like strictly against the use of technology, but I have been skeptical of the insidious nature of tech and the way we've really welcomed it into our home in places that, quite frankly, seems pretty pointless to me. You know, when we look at the level at which the internet of all things, or whatever you want to call it, the level at which we're incorporating technology in our lives, you know, at the very basic, you know, our fridge, and as far as I'm concerned, doesn't need to be on the Wi-Fi, for instance. And what that opens you up to, you know, when you do, the more you open your home up to the internet, the more points of access, I suppose, that, you know, people have if they want to hack into it. And so it starts with social media. And I was pretty fascinated because I use a running app called Strava, and lots of people do. And this is one of those things that for me was quite sort of staggering when you realize the access that this app has and provides to the world. You usually start your runs where you live, right? So and most people run at the same time every night, and you don't need to be, I guess you don't need to use too much imagination to put those two things together.
It's amazing.
Right? So, so I was finding I'd run, I'd usually run about 8 o'clock at night, and I'd start from my house, and this is the loop I'd run, and I'd get back at this time, right? So, so using that, when I'm not home as well. So, and this is all by default. It's out there. You have to change the default settings to prevent this from happening, and that's a pretty useful app. Like, that's something I think is pretty helpful for lots of people who are trying to exercise. But then there's lots of stuff that's completely useless that we give up just as much of ourselves. So this book is about a very tangible form of surveillance, and the fact that these are cameras installed inside properties. But I really wanted to point, and scenes like the one you read, I wanted to point to how much access we give up, and how much stuff, the terms and conditions are a Trojan horse, and what's in there, what's actually packaged in that thing, no one ever reads, but you click to. So it is a little bit about that, yeah.
Yeah, because no matter how careful Lina thinks she's being, she's leaving a footprint, here and there for hackers, or even just, you don't even have to be especially clever as a hacker.
No. It's funny though, because like the whole Snowden thing, people suddenly, we're all like, everyone's like, oh, my phone's listening to me to market, to advertise different products, and you'll talk about a pregnancy test, and then you're getting marketed COTS.
I know.
And so everyone has these stories, and there's probably some truth to it, but we know that because it's happened, we know that it's possible for a third party to access even your microphone, camera. Like, we know that's entirely possible. It takes probably a great deal more sophistication than just your average hacker. Like, I think you have to have certain access. I mean, that was security agencies was using that information, but it's entirely possible to also, to do it I think you are clever enough, you can do that.
Yeah. Well, or even if you're just a teen and you're just a bit more savvy than the rest of us.
If you're just, if you're a teenage voyeur.
Or just a teen. How often do I go to my children just going, how do I do this?
Curious. And spyware and stuff like that. Been around for a long time. So it is quite scary, the reality we live in, and also how little defense we actually have for this,
also, like, just like you were saying about the ads feeding in and everything, it's also that sometimes we just sort of shrug too. It's just like, oh yeah, it does that. Oh well, I don't have anything to hide. I
mean, I often say it's just so surprising how frequently people say, yeah, but I've got nothing to hide, as if that's a defense for giving up fundamental, privacy and security concerns. I have nothing to hide. I love using this app or whatever. The problem is your brain's not equipped to combat how sophisticated the marketing is, by the way. So, and also, not to mention radicalization. Like, you don't know you're being radicalized until you're on it, basically. So there's all sorts of very highly sophisticated algorithms you're trying to combat with, your brain, which is
nonchalance.
But your brain was designed to like find food and stuff. Like, it wasn't designed to process the level of information and to sort of So I'm very troubled by it, Mirandi, and I think I'm always riding in that direction now. I think
that's interesting.
I think it's flavored by it as my tech skepticism, or to some extent.
And can you remember the first sort of inkling you got for this particular story? Like what was the germ?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. It started with a bottle of wine, actually. I wasn't drinking it. What happened was we Airbnb'd we had an apartment before, and we'd always go away. I'm a Kiwi, so we'd go back to New Zealand, or we'd just list our place. And if it got booked, then we'd go to like Adelaide or go stay somewhere else and regional.
All right, okay.
This was about 2 decades ago when, we could leave our house, but we wanted 5-star reviews at the start because, you have to get sort of critical mass and you want to get people to book your place and stuff. So we were really bending over backwards at first, and we would leave out a bottle of wine for the guests. And I think it was possibly our very first guest, or certainly early on. And from memory, I think they were in town for a wedding or something, and it was an older couple from like Adelaide or WA or something. And we'd really researched them, as we possibly could, and had that kind of sense we were being voyeuristic, but also doing due diligence and that sort of thing. Anyway, we left out probably a reasonably nice bottle of wine, probably $25 or something. And when we came back, because they were going to a wedding or an event, came back and there was about a glass worth missing, right? So it was just, I think you could, Miranda, you probably know precisely where it was on the bottle.
I can picture it. I can picture it.
Yeah. Just the bottom of the neck sort of thing. And we, I said to Paige, do you think we can drink the wine? This was after they left, right? So they left it in the fridge and just a little bit was gone.
Right.
And it was the perfect amount that it would have fit in a glass. And, it's this thing where I was like, it's, if you could overpower your kind of instincts or emotions with pure logic, we would have drunk it, because it was, one, you just pour it in a glass. They were sophisticated types. They weren't drinking out of the bottle. If they were, what's the chances they're sick with like a communicable disease and so on and so forth? And, realistically, this would have been a bit an issue. And I'm pretty sure I didn't drink it, but it was just, I started to think, why not? What's the worst that could happen? Maybe they poison the wine, or maybe they put like a sedative in it or something. And then I started to think, that's not even the worst thing that could happen, and I started to imagine everything they could have done in the apartment. And I got to the point where I was like, you burn it down, we're insured, they could have stolen our linen, like it's like $100 or something. I was just going through everything. I thought, well, what if they're watching us? Like, what if they put cameras?
And then spiraled.
A matter of motivation, like why would someone do that?
Yes.
And the more I researched it, the more I realized it happens. And
wow.
Yeah, so I think there's been a fair few cases in the news now where people have found cameras installed in.
Actually, I was going to ask you about that. If there was something that you read that had sort of inspired this story, because you keep on talking about that Colorado case.
Yeah.
And I kept on Googling.
Yeah, no, that's not
find it. Oh God!
I would have done the same thing. I do the same thing as well, but it's that wasn't real. But it was.
No, it wasn't. And then I went off on other tangents.
It's sort of inspired. That particular story was sort of inspired by other events, but
right.
But the more I wrote, it just kept happening, and because people knew, friends and stuff knew what I was writing about. They'd go, "Oh, have you seen this?" And
of course,
kind of this anxious thing, like, "Oh, is someone else going to write a story?" Or I was thinking, is it going to make it less plausible?
Right.
Because there would be real life events, and then we'd know how the cameras work and stuff. So, and part of the research was also speaking to someone who helped to inform policy in the UK. He was an advisor to a politician. I really don't know what that means, but it was basically he had insights from the police and would communicate and work with groups that were trying to break up pedophile rings online.
Yeah.
And so horrible, horrible stories. But there's all sorts of stuff online that he was telling me about, and how these networks operate, and how extraordinarily difficult it is to kind of bring them down. And he said something like 10% of this is child exploitation material.
Yeah.
10% of people creating this material are caught, so 90% are not caught. And
Gone.
And it's often in countries that it's huge money what they're getting, you know, the equivalent of, I don't know, tens of thousands, possibly more Australian dollars. So it's huge money what they're getting, and they've got a 1 in 10 chance of being caught, and so on and so forth. So sort of breaking down for me, and I said, with something like this, you know, would it exist? And he goes, in one format or another, definitely would exist, but it would be probably smaller than I'm imagining. He said there's definitely would be networks of voyeurs sharing their own material from public bathrooms, but also possibly inside short-term rental accommodation. He said if it doesn't exist, it will eventually, as surveillance equipment becomes smaller and stuff. So we got talking at great length about it. But he said stuff like this is so low priority, and they put, you know, this huge sum, I don't know what it is, but so much money and so many resources towards child exploitation material, and they're getting 1 in 10 of them. So with something that's pretty low impact like this, I mean, you don't even know you've been recorded. Yeah, it just wouldn't.
And you're talking about, you know, holiday rentals that somebody's like put all cameras in, you know, like secretly. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. And also actually, I have to say, I was reading bits that were so well portrayed, you know, the group of people watching, I guess. And I did wonder how deep your research went, Josh.
Yeah, no, I was. It
was so realistic.
I was lurking some of the, you know, darkest places of the internet. No, I think the closest I got to anything like that was, I think it was probably when Trump won the presidency. Like so many others, I wanted to understand why, and so I read an article in the Atlantic or something about. It was one of the Chan websites, and you could access it on your browser. I think it's been taken down.
All right.
And about how, just all about it, basically, about, you know, how they've kind of mobilized all these people via Facebook, and how it's really, you know, it's a pretty sophisticated operation they were running in terms of distribution of memes and stuff like this. And I thought, and I sort of looked into it, and I began to think, oh, I'll check it out. And that's probably the closest I got to looking at how these people communicate. When I say these people, I just mean not even digital natives. I'm just talking about people who spend a great deal of time in some of the darker corners of the website talking. I mean, on this website, there was the most vile, racist, whatever you want, you know, sexist, horrible material. And obviously wasn't on there for a great deal of time, but I just remember thinking, you know, this is you're putting together a group of psychopaths, you know, and it's the same with voyeurs, you know, like not everyone's a voyeur to this extent, not everyone's addicted to doing others, but if you were to say 1 in a million are, then that's still across, you know, the globe, that's still a lot of people. And I had the same view about these forums where they were just, you know, discussing how to basically, you know, start how to perform genocide and things like just horrible things quite casually. And I just had to remind myself that this is the 1 in a million times, you know, all these people have found each other because they're all psychopaths, basically. They've got no empathy whatsoever. So,
and social media makes it easier, doesn't it? Or the internet. The internet makes it easier for them to find each other.
Find each other, you know, and then they sort of concentrate, and then they feed off each other. Whereas if you were a voyeur in the, you know, 1700s, you know,
you'd be alone.
You wouldn't out yourself as a voyeur. You know, you wouldn't communicate with other voyeurs because you wouldn't meet them and you wouldn't know how to find them. And you might wander past someone's window and your gaze will linger for a second.
Or you'd make a little hole somewhere.
Yeah, but you certainly wouldn't find, you know, a couple of thousand others who are just as, you know, motivated to view the sort of material and is sharing and stuff like that. So I think, you know, when we talk about issues with tech, this is a big one for me is, you know, when you connect everyone, you're not just connecting all the good people to share good ideas, you're also connecting all the pretty horrible.
Yeah. Did you ever read that there was an article in the New Yorker about a fellow in America who had a hotel, and he had made kind of, that's amazing. It's amazing too, because it read sort of like he thought it was not normal, but the guy, like, you know, like it wasn't like something out. Yeah, it was just really interesting.
There was a documentary called, I'm pretty sure it's actually just called Voyeur, about him.
Right. Oh, really? Must watch it.
But he is
7:30.
He wanted to be famous as well, and I think he quickly worked out that he could just tell the truth and not get arrested.
Yeah.
And then so it became this kind of thing where you're like, well, if this really is true, why isn't he being arrested? And then you start thinking maybe it's not true, and if they went to find evidence, they couldn't. So it's sort of really, this odd kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, that's pre-internet too. So yes, for benefit of, you know, the audience, he was sort of had drilled holes and looked down through vents and stuff, and he was creeping around.
Must have been quite common. I mean, really, it's been so common.
I think pre-internet, to view the material you're after, you would have to, or certainly you couldn't get cameras small enough and stuff. So you would, like, he was motivated to buy a motel for this purpose, I think.
Actually, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question now in relation to that. So a lot of this book plays on our fears of around accommodation. And like I was thinking, you know, I even get quite creeped out, even in a nice hotel, you know, like in the room, you know, you're just quite vulnerable. And even in a hospital, like I'll be lying in there going, anyone could wander in. So do you feel safe when you're in a holiday, in a hotel or, you know, holiday accommodation?
I can't say, because I wrote this book a couple of years ago and I haven't been able to leave the house and really rubbing it in. No, I think even knowing and doing the research and knowing what I know and knew back then, I'm the type of person who I'm like I just will leave my house in my pajamas and collect the bins, and it's like a busy street, and I'll go to the cafe and bare feet. Like I've just given up really caring enough to worry about. Like I wouldn't, if someone was viewing me, enjoy the show. Fuck it, I don't. Because I don't, you know, I just, you know, as much as I'll go on about surveillance being viewed and.
No, I guess I don't mean just surveillance. I just mean the whole. Just being vulnerable, I guess.
No. In that regard, I think
in a sort of,
I think it's probably more about my family than me now with stuff like that.
Right.
You know, I kind of have a real love-hate relationship with social media, as you know.
Yep.
I'm not a real big fan, but I sort of feel like I have to do it. And you know, stuff like, I just have this thing where I'm like, should I put photos of my family on my Instagram? You know, so even stuff like that I think is important. But even, you know, we've had cameras installed at home, inside and outside now. No, just outside. And that was after we had like a home invasion thing, which is a story. But but I think it's just I think that more than knowing about the risks of privacy, you know, I think that made me realize that the danger is usually opportunists, unless you really piss someone off, or unless you are a big public figure, which fortunately I'm not. You know, the danger is more the people who see you gates open, or who rides your bike in the front yard or whatever, you know. So for me, I think the tangible threat really is this immediate, is more about the kind of immediate, your neighbours and close by, as opposed but in saying that, you know, I still think there's so much risk with what we're putting online and stuff like that. And I think in the future more and more, because you know, you put it out there and you can't take it back. And so I don't think I've got enough enemies to really stress daily about it, but I'm very conscious of it for sure.
And you know, when you're writing, I know when I was writing one of my Heloise novels, I needed to find out how to shoot a gun, but you know, like a cult from the 1860s, and I actually did track down like somebody who knew somebody and and thought of going to the shooting. I thought, well, if you're going to be a crime writer, maybe you should go to, the shooting gallery or whatever it is and, like learn. Have you done anything like that? Like, what's your favorite research you've had to do? Because eventually I just like YouTubed it.
I'm sort of the same. I mean, research for me is always fact checking, but I tend to write towards what I'm interested. Like I say that, but then so much this book was research, but I didn't call it research because I was just interested in it.
Yes.
But I think
there's nothing you've done like physically, like
no, I've done
parachuted or
no, I've done loads of weird stuff, but
cool.
Yeah, like but it's more sort of character stuff. Like I shaved my legs and head.
Oh, cool. To be
Evie actually in the first one, but also Evie. I mean, this guy in this book, he's in the SAS, so I got real fit last year, and it was kind of accidental, I think. I just sort of I'm not a deliberate method writer, but you kind of inhabit these characters so much, and it's just this thing you're thinking about it because you're writing about it. So like I think I researched like gambling quite heavily for this as well. So I got into gambling a bit to find out what it's all about, and there's borderline alcoholism too because there's SAS, so I drank a lot. And I joke because none of this is technically research, but for me, so much of the character,
Did you write off those bottles of wine?
No, I do. My accountant is going to
research.
He's going to be pretty stressed if I've got audited. But no, it is for me. Just after what I've written something, I go and check to make sure that it could happen that way. But it's also a good excuse to travel. So this was set in New Zealand.
Oh yeah.
So I had a few trips back.
Oh, you did? Because I was going to ask that because New Zealand's so richly drawn in this book, as well as Rotorua, the areas around that. I was going to read a part again, but I won't. But it was a beautiful sort of part about that area. And I know you're from New Zealand, and I'm trying to write a novel set in Indonesia actually, but I missed out on going there. And I've been there before. I mean, I'm being a bit of a baby because I've been there before, but I would have loved to go back there with my writing goggles on as my character, like you were just saying, sort of like not in character, but, like seeing things like maybe they would. And I actually thought maybe you hadn't been back. And I wondered if in writing about New Zealand, if it made you feel closer to there, especially in this whole thing.
It's funny because I did, I wrote this so long ago. It was due to come out, not due actually, but it was scheduled to come out last year.
Right.
And it was so bad that we pushed it back a whole year.
Right.
And that's actually true. That's what happened. But I had residency in Auckland that really helped from the Michael King Writers Centre, which is great. And it's open to Australians now. They do one year.
Yep.
And that was fantastic. And I went back down to Rotorua and Tarawera where it's set, and my dad's still there. I grew up there, so part of it's just, I think with Makatu and Call Me Evie, I went there a lot, but I didn't grow up there, and I hadn't been back for quite a long time when I was writing about it. And so it's changed even since it came out, but it had changed from my memory to contemporary Makatu. And I think the same thing had happened with Tarawera and Rotorua. And so I was, I had to go back because I didn't want to do what I did with Makatu because it's a much bigger place. And you can piss off the 1,000 people that live in Makatu, but there's about 70,000 in Rotorua and the Lakes districts. So I plan to go back there one day, and I don't think I'd be allowed to if I got it too wrong. So I did go back, and it was great. It was actually.
Did you make up that house of theirs, of Lina's?
A friend of mine who's the paramedic, by the way, he's a paramedic.
Okay,
yeah. So he helped out with research. So when I was over there, I'm just kind of milking as much information out of him as I can while he drives me around the lakes area, and I'm looking at houses going, oh, that's fun. And we found the house basically.
Oh, good.
So we got all the way to the gate, and I was like, wow, this will do. Basically, I needed to know the road and sort of the shape of the house, and then just build the rest out. But yeah, it was funny. I mean, this book was at times set in Australia, and at times it was possibly going to be set in the States, because I was just thinking, where would this happen? You know?
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where I think I ended up going back to setting first again, if that makes sense. So I had the story and everything, and then I sort of pared it all the way back and then started again, but with setting first. And that's what sort of drove lots of the narrative, because I really knew those roads, the distance, and I knew the lake and stuff. So yeah, it did actually change too, I should say.
That's interesting. This is just I'll just go off the map a bit. But do you think, you said you were thinking of setting it in America, and you know, I think just lately we've read another novel, I think by an Australian author, but set in America. Do you think as a thriller writer that would have, you know, does it help like to set in America just because of the audience? Or, you know, because it used to be like if it was set in Australia or whatever, then the English or the Americans didn't want it, you know, that sort of thing. Is that still a thing, or?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it's more so with America than the Brits, but also like I think Jane Harper and
Leanne Moriarty and everyone.
Chris Hammer in the UK. To some extent, but
right.
Even Leanne Moriarty's books aren't particularly Australian, I don't think.
Aren't they?
Oh, I don't know.
I've read one and it was North Sydney.
Yeah, like as in I say, aren't very Australian. Right. It could have been set anywhere. And
clearly.
One Perfect Strangers could have been set in Bali. You know.
Yes.
It wasn't. You know, when I think of Australian novels, I think of how the characters interact with the landscape. Absolutely. Both those stories were very, you know, they were character driven, of course, but they weren't so much about. In fact, Big Little Lies, I'm pretty sure the show was. I'm looking at my wife because she watched it. The show was in the States. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It was set in the States. Yeah.
And I don't know if they lost anything by moving over there, but I think you're right to say that there's just one less hurdle for US readers if it's set in the US, and that wasn't what I was thinking. That wasn't what I was thinking when I was thinking about setting it there. But this next book. The setting may change again, but at the moment, what I'm writing is set there because it's in
America.
Yeah, because it's about college, it's about something that couldn't possibly happen outside of America.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Because somebody did ask me to ask you what you're writing next, and do you feel like you have to go over there and do research on the ground as soon as we're allowed?
I want to, but who knows when that will happen. But yeah, I do. I think I kind of have to. I know the area where it's set reasonably well. We spent quite a bit of time actually. It's not in LA, but we spent quite a bit of time in LA and a little bit in New York.
Nice.
And I lived in Vancouver for a year and got down to Seattle quite a bit. And so I know certain pockets, but where this is set, I don't know very well.
Okay.
And you watch like Mayor of Easttown, like I think we've had this, but you just watch it and you're like, oh, that's like, setting, that's perfect. But obviously you just can't do that.
No.
And so, yeah, no, I think I need US input for sure. And hopefully we're just working through things with my US publisher. So hopefully, you know, that we can have that input.
That's so exciting. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but it's this thing where I still wouldn't really want to rely on someone else's input.
Fair enough.
I'd like to see it with my own eyes and sort of experience it. Yeah. But, you know, who knows, Randy, when we'll be able to get over there. And do I want to go over there as well? Make sure I've got all my insurances up to date and stuff.
That's right. True.
It's a pretty scary place, really.
Do you know what I did last year at the beginning before we had our lockdowns? I got a year's worth. I was so optimistic. I got a year's worth of travel insurance. I bought a year's worth of travel insurance just before lockdown.
I don't think I'll ever
Marty
have
pants.
that sort of optimism again.
What a moron.
Anything, where could we be? Yeah, anywhere. It's certainly, it's less like we'll be overseas than, my home, but it could be.
Anyway, getting back to the book. I'm going to start with some craft questions for the crime writers out there. I want to know tonight how you build your tension and that dread that you have for poor Lina through the book. And even I noticed, even in the middle of the book, there's this heightened, brilliant scene that normally maybe in a crime fiction I would have expected towards the end. So this book is just so twisty and has all these parts and so many threads. I was wondering, do you map it out? I heard you were talking with somebody else saying also you think maybe some crime writers, or being a crime writer, you instinctively know to when there might be a sag, when it's sagging or whatever, and so so I'm just wondering, how do you keep that momentum up all the way through the novel, beautifully?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, and I don't know if I do. I don't know. I hope I do.
You did. I'm telling you.
I mean, for me, I think it's instinct largely, but also there's little things you can do while you're reading your work, little cues, where you get bored, and I think.
Right. So you don't map it out at all?
No, not for
because you had so many threads in here too, with the the voyeurs and ambulance stuff and the gambling, and then the friends, and then newspapers, police.
It's much simpler than you think. I look at the word count and I go, I need more stuff here. And I fill it out. No, but really, with this, I am a structure junkie more than I'll plot something. So I think I'm big picture in that sense. I really love narrative structure. I'm obsessed with it. And for this, I wanted the thriller element to be the first half, and then a sort of mystery.
Yep.
As opposed, and because I was sick of reading books and knowing where the scary bit's going to happen. I was sort of sick of knowing how books were structured, because very early on, in all likelihood, that the sort of emotional, or the action climax and the emotional climax will likely be towards the end.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I want the action climax to be in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was brilliant.
And I think that annoys some readers though, because I think
because there's other climaxes in there. I guess I'm just anyway. It was.
Well, I think the same sort of thing happens in the Clearing. So my second novel, I think something similar happened where I wanted to structure it in like that, but I guess it had that middle kind of peak, and then it kicks back up again at the end.
Yeah.
But I just think I as a reader want to be surprised. I don't want to know that I'm building up this tension towards the conclusion. I don't like that shape in commercial fiction. I don't like that it's so.
Yeah. Do you know how it's going to end though? Do you know what you're working towards?
Usually, yeah. Usually, yeah. I have a really good idea anyway, and then I'll change it, and then I'll go back to my original.
Yeah. And how do you decide whose story it is? Why not Cain's? How do you decide whose story it is when you write?
I mean, I think for me, where I access the story and who I'm accessing the story through. I mean, this flip-flopped a lot. It was Cain, and then it was Lina, and then it was...
Oh, really?
Yeah, so for the longest time, I was writing this from Cain's perspective. Wow. And even there's much more of Cain in there in terms of his history with his family and stuff like that. And I just didn't have his voice as well as I had Lina's, I think, was the main kind of issue. And I just couldn't get it quite right. I didn't think he was that so for me, that's definitely the first thing for me is the voice. I think if you're expecting readers to stay with these characters and this voice for, 300 pages, it has to be compelling and interesting, and they have to care enough about them. And I'm asking a lot of readers with Lina as it is. I'm asking a lot. She's pretty unlikable.
No,
I like her a lot.
no, she's not.
I
think she's just really human. I disagree.
No, I disagree as well, but I think people don't like her. I think she's likable, but I think readers...
I think she does things that... But anyway, she's very
early on,
and understandable.
Yeah, but you've got a reason really early on to not like her, right? So, and I think that's something that can challenge readers a little bit. I
think that depends maybe on the reader.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. It's always the reader's fault. Really.
It is, yeah. Just don't read it if you don't like Lina, but you'll love Lina.
But then, but then I think I thought she was going to be challenging to really connect with, but I think someone who's so emotionally unavailable and so kind of callous as Cain, I think I would have been asking too much. That's certainly how he sort of presents, and his internal world is very much macho and trying to kind of skewer that hyper masculinity, and I'm concerned that some readers would view that as my intention to kind of celebrate. I don't know, but
yes, okay.
I'm trying to point out how toxic that is, and I think if you go into his internal world and his psychology, and you offer that perspective, I think that would be even more challenging for readers.
Yeah, might look like you're rationalizing it too. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. So I've read all your books and loved all your books, and I was wondering how you think you might have changed, or your books might have changed over the years, and has it become any easier? I have heard you talk before about what different readers expect, and trying to choose which readers, I guess, you're trying to write for. But have you sort of found anything in your own sort of writing trajectory?
I think I am slightly more savvy to the market, which isn't necessarily the most authentic way to write, to be honest. But I think I'm more savvy to the commercial realities of publishing in the market. And even with this current project, it was called The Memory Surgeon, and it was very speculative.
Okay.
And it no longer is, because we've been through a couple of rounds of edits and decided that it's not the best direction to take it.
Okay.
Although that's what interested me most about the story, I think something else has emerged from it. And that isn't to criticize my publisher or the editorial approach, but that's just what readers would expect. And we would be trying to tap a whole new market and stuff like that. So I think I'm
right,
more realistic about who I'm writing for and what readers expect. I also think I'm getting better at writing, but I don't necessarily think I'm telling better stories, if that makes sense. Maybe not on the line. Maybe I don't have enough time to really, make sure the prose is clean and
I think, well, it is.
Because, you have to churn them out and you have to write it. But
has it become easier?
Yeah, when I say better, I mean, the end product may not be better, but I think I'm becoming more efficient.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And really understanding how I write as well. When I write my best work, I'm much more brutal now. I'll throw away.
Yeah.
I'll just throw away, 50,000 words like it's going out of fashion.
No.
Like a week ago, and it was great.
Never.
Never. So I think, it's just you're very precious when you write your first book.
Yeah, you are. Yeah,
and
you
editing is like a physical pain,
Yeah.
You can't get out of bed. But then now it's I just realize and understand that it's every time I edit it, every time we cut it down, every time someone gives me feedback, it's going to make it stronger. So
and you're working on new stuff all the time too, which is sort of taking your mind off being precious about that last one.
And I think if it took the things I've got the being an absolute sellout, commercial author, I have the privilege of, putting something out in the world and starting again and entering this new world and forgetting about it. And so
great.
And so I don't live in that world as long anymore. I think with Evie, I'll still live for years after.
All right. Do you sometimes get questioned and it's like a year or two since you wrote it or whatever, and you've even forgotten names of your
no, I do, yeah.
Your readers are quite passionate about it and you've just even forgotten names. It's horrible.
No, I do. I mean, I forget. I forget when you read that scene before. I was like, oh yeah, that happened in the story, because I'm writing straight away, and I'm always doing different random writing projects, and so you kind of and you want to forget about it. You really do, because you don't want to be following, how it's selling necessarily. You don't want to be.
No, you want to be moving on to the next thing. Yeah. Now I'll open to everybody else's questions. I'm sorry, Lana. But just one more question from Emma Biskick. She wanted to know, would you consider writing a series, and why or why not?
I hadn't really considered it, and I always thought I could never get past how implausible it is that all these amazing, insane stories are happening to the same character, or same characters, or in the same town.
Like Midsummer Murders, you don't believe there's that many deaths.
Yeah, and I think some writers get away with it and do it well, and I just don't think I would. But if I were to write a series, I would write one story across 3 books, so sort of like a trilogy. I really like Emma, how Emma's written the Caleb Zellick sort of.
Oh yes.
I love that. I love that. That's great. See, that's the sort of thing, where they and I think to some extent Sarah Bailey did it, sort of as well. But to have a Rebus kind of serial, I would love that, by the way, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't write.
Right. Okay.
And I think it would stop being exciting for me as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay. Are there any questions?
Yes.
From there are. Sorry. Well, I'll shut up then.
We've got quite a few coming in. JP, I love just how realistic you are in person, and I think that's something that really comes across in your writing, which is why I enjoyed The Last Guest so much. We've got a lot of crime writers and budding crime writers in the audience, so a lot of questions about craft, but I'll kick it off with Sarah's question, and she says, what was the hardest scene to write in The Last Guests?
To be honest, probably the last scene, not the prologue, not the epilogue. Sorry, the last scene was really hard to write, for a number of reasons, because I wasn't sure about it and I knew it would piss people off, and that's really fun actually, because there's 2 sides of that. People love it because it's a little bit subversive as well.
That's when I smiled and I was like, okay, you got me.
Yeah, I think that, when that's happened to me and I've gotten over it, because usually, if something happens that you're not expecting like that, and I hope no one was expecting it, but if something happens like that, it can be annoying, I find, because it's not a neat ending. It's suspended, there's still story to be told beyond this point. And for me, it was quite uncomfortable to write that, because my endings tend to close off, will have in the past. I mean, even within The Clearing, which is, it's a new story starting, and that, I don't know if everyone's read that, but it ends and then a new story sort of begins. Whereas this feels like the same story hasn't quite ended, if that makes sense. And so it was quite hard to write, because the whole time I was concerned I was making a mistake and that I'd got it wrong and that it won't land. So that was the hardest. Yeah, that was definitely the hardest scene.
We've got a question from Madeline, and kind of just off the back of what you were saying, she says, how do you go about subverting a traditional thriller plot structure? So it sounded like it was very conscious for The Last Guests.
Yeah, I just think when I'm writing, and I think maybe lots of writers do this, but while I'm writing, I'm also thinking, what would I think here? And I hate things that are too predictable. I don't mind if things are predictable, but I'm always asking at every scene, is there something I can kind of subvert here? What happens if I shifted the scene later? Or what happens if I told the scene through a police report and omitted this piece of information? So for me, the big narrative structure comes in quite early, but these smaller kind of story loops, I'm always conscious of trying to find a surprise for the reader, and often that might lead to a bigger surprise. So there's no like trick that I'm doing or anything. I'm just always thinking about sleight of hand, but not in a way that's deliberately withholding, not in a way that feels manipulative, although maybe it does, I'm not sure, but I'm certainly trying to avoid pure manipulation, and just trying to kind of structure those scenes, even the viewpoints sometimes. Like I said, changing from a first-person perspective to a police report or a radio, or hearing the story on a radio or something like that. That for me allows me to effectively withhold the interior kind of part of that story, the perspective of that character. So things like that, I guess, is what little things I do throughout that, just to try to keep that kind of surprising, I suppose, that element of unpredictability or whatever you want to call it. It's a good question though.
We've got a question from Cass, and she says, how crucial is it to have a good twist in a crime novel, or can a good crime story be sustained through increased suspense and heightened stress?
Good question. I can see Cass.
That's Cass. Cheeky Cass.
Trust you to throw a curveball.
Yeah.
I don't think a story needs. Personally, I don't think a story needs a twist at all. Some of my favorite crime novels don't have big twists. But just to kind of stress my last point, they still have to have surprises. They still can't necessarily be too predictable. And so there's a difference between a story that's not predictable and a story that has these big twists, like Shutter Island, for instance, seems fairly predictable until you get to the end, feels quite predictable. And it's got a big twist that completely undermines everything you knew about the story. And that's when a twist is huge and effective. But twists can also backfire as well if they're pointless, if they're in there. And I don't want to give any examples because I don't want to, slag off any other authors or their books, but I read a lot of examples where the twist is obviously manipulated and overly forced, and the effect is you start to think about the author and less about the story. And then there's books like Laura Elizabeth Wallett's The Newcomer, which really doesn't have a twist, anything approaching a twist, but still gripped me from beginning to end, and still a brilliant crime novel. So I think a good story is much more important than having a big twist or blowing the reader away with this really subversive moment.
We've had a few people ask the question, what are the best thrillers that you've read this year?
That's a good question. I've just read Christian White's new one, which is out later in the year. And Christian's sometimes he feels like my little brother, but he's actually older than me, although he looks much younger. But he's a buddy of mine, and I'm not just shouting out his book because we're friends. It's amazing. He just can't miss. And he also wrote Clickbait, the show, which everyone's seen, I'm sure. So he's absolutely on fire, and his next one's amazing. It's got this kind of Donnie Darko vibe, if anyone remembers that movie. It's set in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's all about satanic panic. And great. And the narrative structure in that is brilliant. I'm a big fan of it. Anna Downs' Shadow House, that's coming out. Oh, that's out now. That's great. She's such a clever writer, really spooky and atmospheric. What else have I read lately? Megan Abbott's new one's pretty good. The Turnout. Yeah, no, I actually haven't read that many thrillers lately, unfortunately, but those three were all brilliant.
Great. We've got a question from Sarah, and she wants to know, have you ever had to work through writer's or reader's block?
Reader's block for sure. Yeah. And I think writer's block is different for everyone. And so how it manifests for me is just distraction. I never sit at the keyboard and I can't put the words, like if I'm at my computer and the Word doc's open, I'll find a way to get the words down. But it's usually like I know I have work to do, so I'll go to the supermarket and I'll do this or that, or go for a walk or whatever. And so that sometimes becomes chronic for me, and I'll get in that habit of every day of trying of avoiding work accidentally, but eventually I realize my output's really low. So I don't have writer's block too much, but reader's block, yeah, definitely. I get that all the time. And I just go back to literary fiction and books that I've really wanted to read for a while, and it usually jars me out of it.
We've got a question from Zach, and he wants to know, is your On Writing podcast coming back?
Maybe one day. I just hate doing stuff like this. This is fine, but I hate doing stuff virtually, so I since I haven't been able to actually meet with authors, I haven't been doing it, but I will again. I think I will. After lockdowns and stuff, I'll get back into it for sure.
Yeah. Got another question here. As a reader, what's an underrated book you've really enjoyed that you think deserves more attention?
Liam Pepper wrote a book called Sweetness and Light last year, which I thought was amazing and possibly my favorite book of the year. And it didn't really go as big as it probably should have. So that I'd say definitely that book.
We're at 7:30. We've officially gone over time. I was so lost in this. This has been an amazing chat. JP, thank you for persevering with Zoom. I know off your book, you must be very anti-technology as well. At the back of that.
We recorded it all.
Yeah. We don't need our fridges to be connected to Wi-Fi. It's just not necessary. And our clocks to speak at us. Mirandi, do you have any finishing words?
No, just thank you for having us. Thank you for chatting with me, JP. I think JP's disappeared.
Oh, he dipped.
As soon as I mentioned it was recorded, he left the conversation. I'll check the cameras I have set up in his house.
Well, thanks, Mirandi, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
See ya.
Thank you for coming, everyone. I love seeing your lovely faces.
Bye.